welcome to the Snowy's Camping Show. How are you, Ben?
Well, thank you. It's early this morning.
It is very early, as you can probably tell by my freshly washed hair. It's very early. So don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening to your podcast, whether that be on YouTube or your favourite podcast app. Now, the earliness of this recording today, we've got a very special guest. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying I've recently finished the Overland Track, which you guys would have known from the last episode. And in the Overland Track, there's about 34 walkers that are allowed to start per day. So every time you reach a hut at night, you've probably got on average about 34 hikers. Sometimes, a bit of a discrepancy there. But on the very first night, walk into hut, everyone's sort of getting all their cooking gear out. And I would say at least 20 of the 34 people in that first hut were cranking a JetBoil system of some kind. And I just looked around the room and I was like, man, because personally I've got a Minimo and a Flash. And I don't take those hiking from when I'm doing, like, say, something more than a 4-dayer, just because of the size, right? I look something just a little bit smaller. Yeah. But I walked in and I was like, man, these really are good cooking systems. And so
good segue.
It is a very good segue into the fact that we have a very special guest all the way from the US, Mike Hebert from JetBoil on the podcast today. Hey, Mike, how you going?
It's going great. How are you?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, good. So we're early morning here. You're mid to late-ish afternoon over there, nearly knock-off time.
Yeah.
But we managed to line up our time so we can have a chat there. But pretty excited to have you. Everyone probably had a pretty good guess what this was going to be about, because if you're watching, we've got the new JetBoil stoves sitting on the desk in front of us here, which is what sort of pushed us to think, let's talk to JetBoil.
Sure.
And we got the chief engineer. Is that your label? We'll let you introduce yourself rather than me. Why don't I do that? Who are you, Mike? And what's your position at JetBoil?
Yeah, so I'm the principal engineer at JetBoil. I've been here for about 12 years now. And as product design engineer, I was an engineering manager for quite a bit, and I have this new role as a principal engineer. But in effect, we're a small engineering team, so it's kind of a combination of design engineer, test engineer, project engineer. We end up doing quite a bit.
Nice. You will probably recognize Mike from some of the JetBoil videos. I think you appeared well, I know I've seen some videos. Maybe they're just training ones. I don't know, but certainly you talking about the approach to the new design with these things, which on the surface may not look immediately different, but there's some really unique design updates to those. But we'll start with the JetBoil itself, the history of the company. Have you been there since the start, and sort of, what was the beginnings of JetBoil?
Yeah, I haven't been there since the start. So when I joined, we actually had just been purchased by Johnson Outdoors when I started, which was like very early 2013. And I was very fortunate to have some overlap with one of the founders of JetBoil. So it was two cousins founded JetBoil in 2001. And so I live in New Hampshire. There were two local guys here in New Hampshire. They did a lot of backpacking together. And they're engineers, entrepreneurial, kind of felt like there's got to be a better way to do this. Like, there's one option is these liquid fuel stoves, and they're messy and you can light your whole campsite on fire and things like that. And this other option is they make these little canister stoves when you waste a lot of fuel and you kind of have to build up a kit. So they had this concept. So the first JetBoil launched in 2004 was the PCS, Personal Cooking System. And like really the two kind of big characteristics that made it what it was. One was the flux ring on the cook pot. And, essentially they put a heat exchanger on the cook pot, and that allows the pot to grab basically twice as much of the energy coming out of that flame that would normally be kind of wasted with like a flat bottom cook pot. And the result is you boil much faster and you waste a lot less fuel. So of course, for backpackers, counting how many cans am I taking with me, how fast is my meal getting ready, that's huge. And then the other aspect of it was this kind of system approach where everything packs in a really compact manner. So you're using your space efficiently, and your pack packs as a system, sets up as a system. It kind of like locks and nests together. So again, like these things just really resonated with backpackers, and I guess the rest is kind of history. It took off from there.
So were you involved in the? I remember the PCS when that came out. Were you involved in the design of that first product?
No, so that was before my time, and then that kind of evolved a few years later into Flash, the original Flash system, which has been our flagship product since then. And I came on just shortly after that, and have been part of a lot of we've ventured off into like more like base camp overlanding systems and cooking related systems, like all the Mo series and things like that. So I've been part of all the expansion of the line, and now kind of like the relaunch of our fast boil line here.
Because we are talking about these, but you do have like the Genesis cooking system. I know.
Yeah, we'll talk a bit about that later.
We are okay. Well, I won't jump into that just yet, but yeah, quite a large range. What do you know when they got started? When there's a new product that you're thinking of, there's always a lot of prototypes. Is there some sort of museum of prototypes at JetBoil where they started with something that's eventually evolved in the PCS and then it took off from there?
Yeah, we've got all kinds of interesting boxes of artifacts on the shelves around the labs. Yeah, we always talk about making it to a kind of a formal museum. It'd be great, but a lot of it's all lingering around the lab still, for sure.
Because it hasn't been. What year was it that it started? It's not that long, is it? Really, JetBoil isn't that older company.
So just about 21 years now. So 2004 was the first PCS. Yep.
Right. Okay.
And yep.
So, Mike, you mentioned that you're in New Hampshire. I'm guessing by your background that you're at home.
I'm at home.
Yeah, nice. I was like, wow, that's a pretty plush office. So, yeah, and you mentioned you've got like a small team of engineers. What is JetBoil's footprint sort of in terms of a company? Like, are you all in one building? Do you have different workshops all over the country? Your manufacturing process. Can you give us a bit of an idea of the size? Because from here, it seems like you're huge, right? But you've just mentioned that you're a small engineering team. So,
yep, yeah. So about a year and a half ago, our R&D office actually got relocated up to Old Town, Maine. And I mentioned that we're part of Johnson Outdoors, which has a number of brands in the U.S. And one of them is Old Town Canoes and Kayaks, is just a very long-standing. One of the top tier, canoe and kayak brands in the U.S. So we both kind of had growing R&D teams, and then they made a new R&D facility up at the Old Town location. So we're co-located with them now, which is great because we have shared resources we can use between the two R&D teams in the same spot. It's a little hard to pin down exactly how many engineers, because some of them, some of the certain roles are specialized and kind of shared between them,
And so being a small team, when you're got an idea for a product, how long does it take from idea to hitting the shelf? If we take the length of time it takes to get stuff on the shelf in Australia out of the picture, because our gas association is quite strict and hard to get things in the country. But how long does it take you from sort of concept to actually a product that you would package up and send out to retailers?
It depends a lot on the product and specifics of it, so I can't give like a solid time frame. But just to talk a little bit about the timing of it, like for example, like right now we're wrapping up and finalizing the designs for the 2026 products, and we're going through like all the certification and kind of getting everything ready for selling season, which is really starting next month. And by the time you get to summer, like orders are placed and we're turning on the production at the factories. And then, that wraps up and stuff goes on ocean shipment and then distribution, customs, all these things happen. So you're adding at least like 9 months to the tail end of anything, just for like logistics of like selling it and getting it where it needs to go. And then if you back out from there, the other direction, we've got a very robust testing process of field testing, lab testing, everything that we do to kind of make sure that everything's going to be totally dialed in. And then, when we feel comfortable with it in-house, we do go out. We have field testers all over in various conditions, and of course, you learn things, and you need the time to kind of address everything and make sure that you've addressed it correctly and go out and recheck everything. So you can imagine there's a pretty big amount of time that happens before that as well. So it would be great to think it's a really quick thing where we can turn these around, but it takes some time.
So do you have to spend a lot of time in the field? I recall a line you said in one of the videos I watched. You said you've been lab testing them for 20 years or something, but field testing them for so much longer. So is that a big part of your job? Just I've got to just go out and go exploring again to do some field testing?
Oh yeah, we definitely have to throw that in there. Yep. But typically in my free time, I'm outside adventuring just about every weekend anyway, and I've got all the latest stuff that I'm working on is just always in the back of the truck. So
yeah, nice.
It's like the personal and professional carryover just all blends together. But yeah, we definitely we have to schedule team events to go out and do some field testing together occasionally as well. It's a good time.
Yeah, nice.
What's your go-to JetBoil product? Like, do you have an old faithful?
It depends. Obviously, if it's a backpacking trip or a car camping trip, is going to make a big difference on am I cooking out of the back of the truck? If that's the case, I'm definitely taking a Genesis with me. Just going to be super versatile and cook for more people, and tailgating at the ski resorts every weekend. That's just sitting there waiting. But then, my backpacking go-to, I've been testing the Flash because I've been working on this one for a while, but typically I'm going with, I like the Micromo system. It's kind of like our lightest weight regulated system. It's a little more compact. It's kind of like, it's not our largest seller, but I think it's one of our more kind of special items in the lineup.
Yeah, we don't have the Micromo in Australia, but I reckon I do know about it because I think we probably might get a couple of people a year that ask about it. Not a huge amount, obviously, because it's not as prevalent here, but it does look like a nifty little system. Is it similar to, say, like you zip or your Minimo, but like in a more compact form? Is it the same sort of system?
Yeah, I guess if Minimo and Zip kind of had a child together.
Nice.
So it has the advanced features that are in the Minimo, but it has more of the compact nature of the Zip.
Gotcha.
Nice.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it's I actually haven't had a look at the range in the US, but I didn't even know what's it called? The mini
Micromo?
The Micromo.
Yeah, so I haven't actually had a look at the US range, but there's obviously more to it than I realised.
I often look at businesses that have catalogs that we can't get here and look at them longingly of like, oh, who do I know in that country that I can get to buy me those things?
So we move on to the new Flash and Zip models, I guess.
I'm going to have one question quickly before we do. Obviously, as we'll get into a bit later, discrepancies with what you guys produce in the US versus potentially international countries. But generally, do you do a review annually of your gear, or is it every sort of 2 years, or how often would you look at doing a range review?
That's a little bit out of the scope of what I'm responsible for.
Okay. Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I know.
So, sales and marketing is kind of discussing and reviewing that pretty regularly, as far as I understand, as far as what products need to be available where.
Okay, right. I'll try and tailor a question to be more specific.
Mike just designs the cool stuff.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to.
So up until say 2 weeks ago, right? Our Flash, the only Flash model we could get in Australia was a 2019 Flash model. How many models of Flash have you guys done since your 2019 model and this new one?
Yeah, so we had one version of Flash in between in the US. And then that we didn't go to Australia with that one. And I'm sure we'll have a conversation about, international standards and testing and things like that. But then we did launch this new flash and zip together kind of globally all at the same time. So US, Europe, Japan, Australia, everybody's getting the same kind of model and product everywhere.
Nice.
So that was a big win for us. Yeah, we're excited to pull that off.
Yeah, and one for the listeners. Don't worry, listeners. We have the same as everyone else now.
Yeah, we're up to speed.
We're up to speed.
We will touch on that a little bit later, though, the AGA standards. But let's talk about the new flash, which is the one on our right, your left here, and the zip next to us here. As we mentioned before, on the surface, on a quick glance, they don't necessarily look that different to the previous models, but you've injected a few key improvements based on your feedback over the years. So did you want to talk to the updates there?
Sure. I think the most kind of obvious update and exciting is the new ignition system and valve interface that you see. It's very unique for a backpacking type product. We've now got a knob on there. The ignition is built into the knob, so you rotate, clicks, ignites, and it just basically couldn't be any simpler, which is what we were going for. But it's a pretty new architecture. Typically, on a backpacking stove, you're going to have like the wire bail type valve control on it. And then if it has ignition built in, there's a separate button for the piezo. And what we've been, witnessing and observing for years is there's just uncertainty inevitably in like, well, how many times do I rotate this? Where am I in the control? Am I letting the right amount of gas out? Now where's this button? And I got to find it. And some people are total pros at it, and we don't necessarily hear a lot of complaints. It's just been accepted. This is how you use a backpacking stove. But we kind of challenge that, like, this could just be a lot simpler and easier, and you just like see people kind of struggle with it here and there. So what we had saw was a lot of like larger format stoves, and like, your range in your kitchen or any barbecue or something, there's a knob and there's an indicator around it. It's like, here's high, here's low, here's where you ignite it. And you just turn and the ignition's built in and everything's kind of automatic and just absolutely dead simple. And we were like, well, how do we get something like that miniaturized and put into a backpacking stove? And that was kind of like the initial challenge of this whole thing, was to like change that interface. And I think it's the most unique piece about it. It was a little tricky kind of pulling it off to get the ignition built into the knob. We didn't have room to just put an igniter next to the knob. It's buried down in there. And we actually have a patent pending on the mechanism to turn the valve rotation into the knob ignition.
Okay.
So that's pretty exciting. So it's kind of totally rethought. And like I said, now you know where you are. So you can see where high is, you can see where low is. And you're not just going by feel for when you make an adjustment to the flame. So I think that's probably number one. And number two thing that you'll notice right off the bat is like we've completely redesigned the grip zone and where you're kind of touching and interfacing, where you're going to handle the burner base. I think that JetBoil has always been seen as like a very approachable product. There's like plastic handling points on the burner base, and there's this cozy on the cook pot. But like still, again, we would see uncertainty. I'm like, can I really touch it there? I'm not quite sure. It's a little bit close to that metal part. So we just wanted to make it as simple as we could. And now you've got this kind of rubberized bright grip zone, and that's just obviously where you hold it, if you're connecting the fuel can or adjusting the flame or igniting it or connecting the cook pot, like that's your safe handling point. Super obvious.
Nice.
When I first saw these, I was quite surprised, because I think in my mind, if I'm thinking about, like a stove knob and like a piezo click on like your barbecue or even a lot of camping stoves, this even though it's functional and it's a universal way to operate your gas, it often tends to be the weak point. You know, people calling us all the time, oh, my knob's broken, or I've misplaced them, or they've come off, or, you know, the piezo's in there is not working. So I was really pleasantly surprised when I saw the new flash, because it's very robust. Like there's nothing, you know, there's none of that sort of initial concern that you would have in this at all. It's very much addressed. How much was that, you know, the new base of the shroud and the knob, how much was that a part of the design process to get right?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time on that and kind of like torture testing because we need it to be bomb proof. You know, initial kind of thoughts of even internally like skepticism, like I don't know, plastic knob, whatever. We knew that this thing had to be super robust, and we've put it through the ringer. It's pretty rock solid. You can feel it when you get your hands on it. You can tell that
it does feel good.
It's rugged. Yeah.
The one other thing that I certainly noticed coming from, you know, knowing JetBoil for quite a while, was the piezo was always a weak point. And you guys sold replacement piezo kits, so you could replace those if they broke, because it was kind of hanging out there a little bit. This one, I don't think the pictures do it any justice, but this is the first time this morning I've had a really good look at it, but it just feels so much more robust, that little piezo bit that's coming over to spark the flame encased in that ceramic just feels infinitely more robust than the old version.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and the most common failure with a piezo ignition on almost any backpacking stove is that little electrode piece at the top. And it's just so easy. It's exposed. You can bump it and the gap becomes too small, or it can catch on something and snag and pull up. And if that gap is too small or too large, it's just not going to function the way that it's intended to. So we have a much more robust pin on there, first of all, and then it's completely encased in all directions except for the very, 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 very end of it. So that thing is never gonna move out of position. It's like the electrode gap in your spark plug in your car. It's there. And that's how it's gonna work from here on out. So
in mine I use a Nippy's orange 2-liter juice bottle lid. When I'm packing it away, it just sits right over the burner, and the little electrode keeps them protected. Yeah, okay. Which you wouldn't need to do with this one.
So this, with the pot support, I'm trying to recall, I haven't packed one away for a while, but the old pot support didn't, like this one packs inside the actual burner head. When you fold it up, it sits in there and almost protects the burner head. I suppose the old one didn't pack in there, did it? It sat separately in there.
So you're the fuel can stabilizer?
Yeah, sorry.
The orange stabilizer?
That's right.
Okay, yep. Yeah, I mix them up all the time. Yeah. So the fuel can stabilizer, it's very, very similar to the prior, but it has a slight modification, so it'll snap onto the burner head. And the reasoning there is so that when you pack it into the cook pot, you can put the burner basically facing down into the cook pot. It stays in position, and it creates an offset in the bottom, so you don't have like metal on metal contact.
Gotcha.
In the bottom of the cook pot.
Okay. Well, that's a cool little improvement, and I guess it just protects that burner a bit as well. I was trying to work out how to put it in.
I'm getting diverted from the main point, which is our conversation. Sorry, Mike. I'm like, lots of people often talk. You know the movie Up. I'm sure you know the movie Up because you're American, but there's a really common thing in Australia where people are like squirrel. That's a little bit how my brain works now. I've picked this up and I've started to play with it, and now this is what I'm doing. What about the cup itself? Can you talk us through any modifications you've done there?
Just minor. We very much stuck with our flagship system is a 1 liter cook pot, and that's our most popular. We have the same flux ring on there. The thing that we changed is the connection to the burner base. Two things. We went from there used to be 2 kind of like dimples and bayonet slots to lock it.
Yeah.
We went to 3. And then we also put these little indicators on there. And the purpose of the indicators is previously when you kind of twist and lock your cook pot without indicators. Well, now you didn't know. It's like, okay, I know it's locked, but if you guessed the wrong way, you maybe tighten it on there even further. So there was some uncertainty around that we wanted to address. So now it's almost like a kitchen appliance. So you got like, here's your lock position, here's your unlock position. Yep. So you can see where it is, and then you know exactly what way to move it if you want to unlock it or lock it. And then the change to 3, it's a little more secure with 3. Not that was any kind of issue, but the biggest thing was, you just see people sometimes kind of like looking around trying to figure out like, well, where are the features that need to line up? And the simple change to 3 makes it so that no matter how you're holding it, you always have a dimple and then like the locking bayonet slot within eyesight. You don't need to kind of like go searching for them. You always have line of sight on each of them. You can line them up really quick and kind of get your cook pot locked on there.
I found out, I don't know, this is sort of potentially a little bit of a problem now, and bearing in mind that my flash is quite old. I've found sometimes that after you finish cooking on it, it's a little bit hard to twist off. Maybe it's because of, the temperature and the metal expanding and whatever. Sometimes it can get a bit sticky. Mm-hmm. Is that something that is common or that you've heard of before? Is that more of a user error thing, or is that something that's also potentially addressed by having 3 little locking pins?
So we actually address that in a different way. Okay. The base plate on the burner, you'll notice now, is actually aluminum.
Yeah.
And before it was steel. So steel and aluminum expand and contract at different rates. So you'd lock it, and then when it gets heated up, they expand a little bit differently, and it could seize up or get tight, and you have to kind of wait for it to cool down. So now they expand and contract together at the same rate. So however firmly you locked it on there is how firmly it is.
Yeah, nice. Because I was like, man, I don't know if this is just me being, dumb, or if this is a thing for everyone. So I'm glad. Obviously, on that. When it fully, thanks, Ben. That's really, really professional of you.
A quick brief aside. Just the instructions on the side here, and this is something that has come up before. I didn't have a solid answer for it, but light before attaching the pot. Why is that?
Yep.
Great question.
That's because of the poof. So what can happen?
The technical
you have
term?
the cook pot on there. Yeah, that's a technical term, the poof. So, with any gas stove and even your home range, you should always technically light it prior to putting the cook pot on there, because you can have gas built up that when you then strike the ignition, kind of does that little.
Gotcha. Okay.
Poof.
Yeah.
I had a feeling
it can be a little unsettling if you're not prepared for it.
Yeah.
I had a feeling that's what it was, but now I know what the technical term is, so we can talk confidently to customers about the poof.
Yeah, there you go.
So I want to talk about the zip, because for me, I've mentioned I've got the Flash, I've got the Minimo. I love them both. So, the Sumo totally doesn't come on my radar because it's just too big, right? I have no need for it, even though I think it's cool and I'm like, oh, I'd like that. The zip, really I haven't had much to do with. I guess it's like probably the least out of the 4 that we range that people ask about. Like, sell the zip to me. Tell me why it's great. Tell me why someone would want to use it compared to what else you've got in your range.
Yeah, so I think for zip, there's like a little bit of stripped down frills and bells and whistles, right? And some people just appreciate that. And it's also going to be a little more compact. It's a 0.8 liter cook pot instead of a 1 liter. So if you're looking for just the essentials, you're like, I don't care about the thing that changes color on the cook pot, and I'm bringing a lighter anyway to, get the stove lit, and I just want to save more space in my pack. That's, the people that will gravitate more to a zip. It's kind of like the no frills solution.
Okay.
And now they're much more closely related, like family wise in the design. There's many more common design features and components, accessories. They were a little astray before. So the zip, even visually now, is kind of like you can tell it's part of the family with Flash.
Yeah, it does. It does look like the little brother sort of thing.
Yep.
Go on, Benji.
So with this style of stove, primarily it's for boiling water quickly and it does that really well. A lot of people will. I know I've had conversations in the past with people who go, okay, I can boil my water, but what if I want to reheat my pasta or something like that? Typically, my response has been not ideal for that. But I know I had a friend in the past who said, I cook rice and stuff in mine. You just got to keep stirring it. Like you can't let it settle on the bottom because it's so hot.
Yeah.
Do you have any feedback for people to either want to get one of these but do want to reheat food? Like I know you can get the pot support and a different sort of like a fry pan and stuff to go on top of it for cooking different types of food. But would you reheat a meal in that? Do you have any techniques for people who want to try and do that?
Yeah, so you can definitely do it. You can do cooking with a flash or a zip. I think if you're going to be doing a lot of that, that's why we have our more advanced line with the Minimo and Sumo, and those have a much higher precision valve in there, and they have a regulator, and all of these things will help towards controlling like a very low flame. So you can cook rice, and you do have to stir it, but you don't have to kind of tend to it so aggressively.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think you have to take a lot more care if you're going to be using a flash or zip. I mean, they are intended to be just super fast water boilers. That's what most people are using them for. And yeah, I think you hit it with the tips and tricks on there. You got to just
keep stirring.
stir a lot. Don't let that stuff build up on the bottom.
Yeah.
As soon as you start to kind of cook anything to the bottom, it becomes bad news pretty quickly. So if you're to do a lot of that, I definitely recommend getting one of our precision cook products.
Okay, it's probably a good segue into the next question, which is around regulators. Can you do these have a regulator in them? Excuse me, I've come unprepared with that.
No, that's fine. No, so they don't have regulators. Flash and Zip do not have a regulator. They run directly off the can pressure. And I guess to understand the importance of a regulator, you first have to understand like what happens without a regulator. Yep. So Flash and Zip are running off the pressure in the canister, and the gas pressure is completely based on the gas temperature. So a lot of there is some relation to how much fuel is in there, but it's kind of secondhand. The vapor pressure in that canister depends on temperature, and as you use the gas, it actually cools the canister down, and then your temperature drops, and then your pressure drops. So when you have a direct pressure system, your output will decrease over time. So if you're using it for a long period of time, the flame will get kind of smaller and smaller. What happens if you have a low amount of fuel in the canister is it cools a lot quicker than if you have a lot of fuel in the canister. So there is that factor there. It'll start out the same, but it'll drop in its output much quicker if the fuel can is lower. So those are some of the drawbacks of having a direct pressure system. The good news for Flash and Zip is like they boil so quick you typically don't see that effect. It's just you're just boiling, and then it doesn't matter. You haven't cooled the canister off all that much really. But if you are doing a lot of cooking or prolonged usage or like snow melting and stuff like that, that's where you would want to step up into a system with a regulator on it. And what the regulator does is it drops the delivery pressure to the rest of the stove and the valve and everything. And the way that it works is as long as the pressure in the can is above a certain threshold, it just basically normalizes it and brings it down to that threshold. So until the pressure is super, super low, you'll get the same output no matter what. It doesn't matter how long you use it for, how much fuel is in the canister. You're going to get that consistent output with a regulator.
Okay.
And one of the reasons that the regulator and the precision simmer work so well together is that when you have precision simmer, when you have a constant pressure feeding into it, it'll just stay right there.
Okay.
You could imagine if you had precision simmer, but the pressure going into it is changing all the time.
Yep.
It's like, oh, great, I dialed in my flame, but now it's going to move because the can pressure changes. So the advanced systems, like they tackle a number of things, including how well you can cook, how long you can run the stove for at full blast and kind of maintain output, and then cold temperature, like cold weather usage. It's going to be much better if you have a regulator on that.
Gotcha. Can we, on that, while we're talking technical, and we touched a little bit on this before the episode, but gas mixers, there's a 80-20 butane propane or isobutane propane. I'm sure we'd find forums out there where people talk about what's the best mix is generally an 80-20 or a 70-30. Can you give us your take on what those mixes are and whether it really makes a difference?
I know that what I'll say is, so our jet power fuel is categorized in Australia as a 75-25 mix. When they mix this fuel and put it into the cans, there's some tolerance windows on kind of each component of that and how much can go in there. There's also a limit on how much propane can be in that canister, and there's a European EN standard that kind of dictates that. If there's too much propane is a much higher vapor pressure. It wouldn't be safe to have that thin wall canister. That's why regular pure propane cylinders has big, thick, heavy sidewalls.
Gotcha.
Because the pressure is a lot greater. So we have the 75-25 blend, and we basically have as much propane as you can put in there without going beyond the regulation. Propane is a better fuel than the isobutane because it's going to maintain pressure at a lower temperature for a longer time.
Okay.
More propane, the better. I can say that.
Okay. But you can use, obviously it's going to be not more than what they're allowed to have in the gas canister, but you can use an isobutane propane mix. There's no limitations on what you should or shouldn't use with a stove like this, as long as it's got the right valve, I suppose.
They're also so very similar.
Yep.
If it's 80-20 or 75-25, it's going to be very similar for sure.
Gotcha.
But we just kind of, like I said, we kind of max out how much propane we have in our mix.
Cool. Sorry, I've asked lots of questions.
That's totally fine.
You've noted here flash versus minimo.
Yeah, I think
what was your question on that one?
It was more so we've touched on that a bit already, I think, in terms of the regulator and the simmer control. I would like to know, because having a minimo, the performance of that in terms of sort of cooking and like frying and stuff, I really like, like if I'm going away even just for a weekend and it's just one or two of us, that might be what I use. Like I might not even take a whole camp stove, right? What are the challenges in putting something that works so well into something so small?
Yeah, that's always a challenge. And again, even with the new flash, that's the challenge we had with getting the ignition system to get in there. And I think the biggest feat of it is making sure that everything's going to be very reliable, very robust, high quality, and you're not sacrificing any of that by like over miniaturizing, right? So we have a nice little compact regulator valve design that goes into the Minimo, and that's it. That burner base actually, carries through whether it's Sumo, Micromo, Minimo. Again, you don't have the Micromo in Australia.
Thanks for rubbing it in.
That's kind of like our advanced base there.
And so that has the regulator in it and the simmer control in it. So they're separate components, yeah?
Yeah, correct.
And what is in terms of the actual regulator, when you're designing that, is that just a standard thing that's relatively universal, or is it, like can the same thing be applied in all gas appliances, stoves, heaters, or whatever? Or is it a totally separate thing that you've had to build just for your product? Sorry, this might sound like the stupidest question because I know nothing about anything technical.
This is a fantastic question. No, not all regulators are created equal by any means. I think if you look at larger scale, like home range or gas barbecue appliances, those regulators are pretty standard and universal. They're going to all put out the same pressure, and they have the big kind of diaphragm built into them. But when you get into like backpacking stoves, there's a lot of unique takes because people have tried to miniaturize it, and they all run at their own kind of unique pressures. And there's a lot of trade-offs in, if you are over miniaturizing, you might sacrifice a lot of consistency in your performance and things like that. So we do have our own design on that regulator, and we have our own thoughts on how they stack up and compare to others. And we, of course, we're JetBoil, we like our regulator the best. So
I'm going to throw a question out here, which I hope is okay to ask. Because, and this one comes from a lot of customers, in the sense that we've had here, I would say in the last 12 months, I reckon Aldi, for example, they've sold this little compact unit that is essentially the same premise, right? It's the same premise as your Flash or whatever.
Looks the same.
Looks similar, then you've got like Gasmate who've brought something out. Someone on a trip recently was using a Fire Maple, and they were like, oh, it's just the same as JetBoil. And I'm like, yeah, but I've been using mine for 10 years. So come back to me in 10 years and see if your Fire Maple is still cranking along. But is that like, so I think it is probably a fair question that some people ask, if I can go and buy this for $30, why would I invest in a JetBoil? What's the difference, I guess, in terms of those imitation products? Essentially, if you sort of get my drift, what's the difference? Why would somebody buy a JetBoil versus, a $30 Audi imitation?
Yeah, and I think you touched upon the main thing there. I think it comes down to really like the quality of the design and the materials used. And if you pick them up side by side and kind of hold them in your hand, I think you can feel a lot of that kind of right off the bat. And the JetBoils they are a little bit more compact in their nature. And if you compare the burner base and the cook pot and the connection, you're getting a higher quality, more compact kind of version. And then, I won't name any names, but, in the US, we have a lot of these things like that are on Amazon and stuff like that. And you can look and see things where people are using it, and like the pot support arms are just, they melt, and not melt, but, bend and deform, and the pot will fall off. Yeah. And it's like, come on. So, we're holding ourselves to a super high standard of what we do and the product. And of course, always talking to people, I've had my JetBoil for 15 years or 17 years or something like that. Maybe time to get a new one. But
how much of that?
Yeah.
Don't need to replace them. I just need to get more.
Right.
How much of the design is patented, I suppose, because there's a lot that look the same, but it's the flux ring thing, isn't it? But then others put a flux ring in as well. But have you guys got patents on that design, and is that a headache to deal with copycats?
It's a little bit of a headache. We have design patents on a lot. So there's design and utility patents. And we have a lot of kind of design protection, which are a little easier to work around. And you can see some of the competitors having stuff like that. But we do have a number of utility patents on certain features. And, like I mentioned, we have one pending approval right now for the ignition system that's in the new model here, so that we have some proprietary protection around exactly how we execute that.
Okay, must be a headache to try and keep up with it. People out there trying to just make the same, and they make it just different enough for you to not be able to do anything about it. But
Yep.
The international standards. Let's touch on that. Unless you've got any other questions on that topic.
No, but the only thing I will say is that sometimes, sometimes people think, I don't know if I want something like this. So I guess in some ways the imitations aren't necessary. Like they're obviously, it's terrible to have imitations out there, right, on something that you love and care for and is quality. But at the same time, it's like imitation is the best form of flattery. Right. So if there's imitations out there, it's because you know that your product works. But then I think in some ways it can also be a stepping stone. You know, like I knew somebody who bought a Gasmate because it was relatively cheap. They used it and they loved it. And then they were like, yeah, I'm actually going to invest in a JetBoil now because I know that that's what I want to use, you know. So I guess in a sense it's potentially
it's a positive spin on it.
Yeah, I don't know, just being a bit of devil's advocate there. I just had this pondering where I was like, oh, you know, maybe it is people's stepping stone into investing in a JetBoil where they otherwise wouldn't, which is potentially not a bad thing.
So international standards, managing international standards, and I'll use, I know the Flash took a little while. The Genesis, I know took ages to come in. We had so many inquiries about the Genesis. Ages. And for people who haven't seen the Genesis, it's, when we saw it, we thought, wow, that's a expensive camp stove, and it's been really popular. I think when you look at it and maybe you start to use it, you realize, okay, it's a lot of money, but it's worth the money because you get a 2-burner stove in this compact little unit. But obviously, I haven't used it, but it obviously performs really well. But that took ages to get through the Australian standard. I know we just waited, and customers get frustrated. But it's not your fault. It's not our fault. It's the Australian Gas Association, and we don't want to talk negatively about them because obviously they've got things in place for safety reasons.
Yeah.
They're very strict. But yeah, that must come into play when you're timing a launch of a product. You're going worldwide on something, and then are other countries as slow as us, or are we always just waiting for Australia to catch up before you can release it?
No, well, so first, just so to clarify, like for Genesis, for example, you know, we launched in the US, and you mentioned the price point, right? So at first it was like, this is a very expensive stove, just like you said. And the project to do the Australian Genesis actually didn't really, like, it got talked about for a long time, but we didn't actually really begin to move on it for quite a while until we had to get over a certain hurdle of the demand was enough for us to, you know, invest in creating it, even though it was a modification, and then invest in, you know, all the testing and certification. Everything costs money. So once that actually you know, got thrown over to our plate to like make this Australian version, we actually executed on it pretty quickly and got it over there and into Australia. And a big piece of that was even like with COVID, everybody just started buying stuff like this, and you know, camping participation was up so much. So we had kind of like a catalyst for like, okay, there's definitely demand to make this project happen. And, you know, with international standards, I think they're all as tricky as Australia. There's a lot of kind of subtleties and ambiguities that can be challenging in like, what's the intention and what's the exact interpretation and method of like how this should be tested upon. And some of that, like I said, there might be a little bit of interpretation of what's intended, how they're going to do it. It's kind of fluid over time with different, you know, agencies and things like that. So it's always a struggle globally to do that. We did pretty well with Genesis and get that over there. And, you know, we've learned a lot of lessons of how to engage early on in these projects. And I think that's really what got us to the point we had this global launch for the new Flash and Zip, and it hit everywhere in the same day globally. So that was really exciting. You know, it took as long to get certified for Canada, in the US and Australia, and, you know, Japan and Europe. So we're super happy with how that worked out. We've learned a lot of painful lessons to get there. Yeah.
So is America just like this lawless land of gas appliances where you can just crank stuff out and there's nobody cares? You just refilling your gas bottles in your backyard with like something you found on Amazon, and like, is it just I think the premise of that question obviously is there's quite a lot of product that's available in America that we can't get in Australia, not just with JetBoil. And I think also, with our YouTube channel and stuff, we have a global audience. Lots of times we have Americans commenting, I use this in my lounge room and it's great. And we're like, what do you mean? You're going to kill yourself. You can't use this in a lounge room. And they're like, what are you talking about? So, when you're designing your products, are you essentially designing them for obviously with the zip and the flash global launch excluded, are you designing them for use in America primarily and then going to other countries and being like, we want to sell this, and they're coming back and saying yes or no, and then the process starts? I get like I just, in my mind, that's how it is. You've made this Genesis and you've been like, here you go, Summer, who are the distributors for JetBoil in Australia, in case you didn't know that, listeners. And then AGA is like, nope, you can't, not safe or whatever. And then from there goes this particular process. Is that how it works or not? Like, can you give me a bit more specific details about that?
Yeah. So it depends on the product. So for a stove like flash or zip that runs off isobutane propane, that's available globally. So from the beginning of that project, we're designing that to be one product that will work everywhere, comply to all standards. In the case of like Genesis, for example, that was going to be a propane product from day one. And we focused just on North America for that, the initial kind of like launch and design of that. We knew that most other places, you propane in Australia, but most places don't, and they won't allow it. So we just focused on North America. And like you mentioned, to sell in the US, you don't need any certification, which is kind of scary.
Yeah.
There's a stove standard, and it's like a shared ANSI CSA standard, and ANSI is the US version, CSA is the Canadian version, but it's actually the same exact standard. They share the title. The difference is you need it to sell in Canada. You don't need it to sell in the US. So there's a lot of product on Amazon that we're competing with, and it just isn't certified and doesn't need it. It's like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
So, we won't ever sell a product in the US. Like, we hold ourselves internally. It's a requirement that we are certified to ANSI CSA. So like we have that, we test to it internally. We have a third party test and certify it as well. So for Genesis, that's what we did. And we know we're going to comply with that ANSI standard. And then later on, like I mentioned later on, I was like, oh, we can make this Australian version. There's enough demand for it. And just to keep going, because I'll go into the weeds.
Yeah, do it.
One of the things that made Genesis a little complicated was we had the JetLink output, right? And that's a feature that is available in the US, is not available in Australia. And it's one of those features where nobody ever thought of like, well, there's no clauses about having something like that because we actually have a utility patent on it. Nobody's done that before. So there's not really any like precedence or like how do we handle this? And when we decided we were going to sell Genesis in Australia, what we didn't want is for it to take an incredibly long time with everything's figured out. Like, how do we handle this JetLink output? Because it begins to open up, what are you plugging in there? What are we saying? And all these things, right? So we just made the decision, like, if we eliminate it, that's going to help us fast track getting a product into Australia. So it's not that we couldn't have it on there. So we chose not to, for like getting the Genesis product into Australia and having it in people's hands there.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Do you know what the sort of particular objections are? I guess is like US Genesis versus Australian Genesis is the only difference the JetLink functionality?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yep.
In that particular sense, from what you've said, I'm understanding that in terms of getting it into Australia, the sticking point would be because it's not necessarily a standard design feature that is available on all gas appliances. There's questions about what its purpose is and function is. In that sense, having a JetLink, sorry, I've just got a frog in my throat. Having a JetLink ecosystem within JetBoil and having it be pretty bloody obvious what the JetLink functionality is, that's not enough for the AGA or for the standards.
Again, we all we knew is that it would complicate things and take time. So that's where we just stopped and said, what if it's not there?
Yeah, right.
This is much more straightforward.
Okay.
So that's the way we went with it. Yeah.
When you're designing something to cater for all of those variations across all the countries, like you design one of the flash here to cover every country, how many small variations are we talking about? Is it a handful? Are we talking 50, 100 sort of points that you need to consider in your design? Or how many variations of a product where you have to go to one country, then different one to another one? Is there a lot of variations?
Well, our goal is to have no variation. And the product itself in this case has no variation. The only variations that we have on the new Flash and Zip are going to be in like some of the content on the instructions. There's different requirements for some warnings. Some of the content on the packaging similar, and then like the tag that is attached to the product. Everybody's got their own. You have to say this warning this way, this warning. But the product itself is exactly the same, and that's definitely our goal. In the past, we've had to do subtle variations. So this is the build that goes here and the build that goes there. But we're very happy to achieve a globally compliant product with this design, which was great.
Is that a bit of a mission then, to grab all of these international standards and then try and come up with one that meets all of those variations? And
is that your job? Do you have all of the standard files and have to comb through them every night with a magnifying glass?
Yeah, basically. Yep. So talked about wearing a lot of hats. Yeah. Had to manage all of that and making sure that we're going to be compliant with all of it and all the testing for all the slightly different ways that they test, the same thing 4 different ways around the world. So there was a lot that went into that to achieve it.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, there's not really one standard to rule them all, more than like you just have to meet all of them.
I also totally random question, but the amount of comments we get on the Genesis, whoever designed that primarily, the aesthetics of it, especially when it's packed up, has anybody ever told you it looks exactly like the robot from Flubber?
From what?
Flubber. Please tell me.
Flubber. Oh, yeah. I haven't heard that before.
No. You know what I'm talking about though, right? That little robot that flies around and follows Robin Williams everywhere and talks to him.
Oh, yeah.
Nope.
Everyone comments about that.
We'll get our videographer to cut a B-roll in now of that.
Yeah.
So everyone knows. Because everyone's going to be Googling robot from Flubber.
Yeah, know.
I'm definitely going to be Googling it as soon as we are hung up here.
Yeah.
But that was my first design project, and since I don't know what you're referring to, I can assure you it wasn't
the Flubber robot. Okay. Well, you've heard it here first, straight from the horse's mouth.
All right.
You mentioned earlier 2026 products. Is there anything you can allude to there, or is that all a big secret?
Hang on, he's just looking up the robot from Flubber.
Yeah.
I would love to tease the 2026 products, but I can't do that. I can't give it away yet.
You won't tell anyone.
Right.
What do you, I don't know if this is in your wheelhouse to potentially answer, but what do you see the future of JetBoil, or where do you see the direction of it going?
Yeah, again, I don't know how much I can speak to, the strategy there, in like,
Sure.
what technologies we're pushing and formats and things like that. But I'll say we definitely have an exciting like roadmap and a lot of good development projects going on, and I'll be excited to showcase all of them over the upcoming years. Yeah.
Okay, so then my next question is, given, the relative success of your global launch with your Zip and your Flash, would the intention be moving forward for a large portion of your range to meet those global standards, or is it still,
Yep.
are you still intending to be in-house in America for a lot of stuff?
No, I think that the core of JetBoil is the backpacking products and the isobutane products, and anything like that will just be intended to be a global product always. Again, Genesis was very unique in its like initiation, and we're just thinking this is like a U.S. Consumer product, and then it ended up that there's really a great fit for it in Australia too, which is awesome. And without a doubt, like, overlanding is taking off all over the US, all over Australia, and that kind of thing. So like that, the Genesis works really well with that. So if we were to redo that now, I'm very confident in saying that like we would consider this is going to be US and Australia from the get-go, and think about it that way. We definitely want to think as globally as we can from conception.
Cool. So the teasing of the 2026 products will be relevant to Australia, at least to a certain extent.
Definitely. Yep. That's all we can tell our customers.
Yeah.
I've just had another technical question come into mind right at the finish line. BTU testing, heat output, is that a standard?
Yep.
And how is it done? Can people trust what it says on one stove to another? So let's say your imitations to JetBoil, they both have a BTU rating. What are the considerations there for the consumer?
That's a good fully loaded question.
Really? Right at the end.
Dive into that. Yeah, that's good.
Tricked you.
Didn't warn you on this one.
each kind of international standard has its own method for how you measure BTU output. So let's just say we take Australia, right? And they have it's a specific, you do this test this way, this much fuel burnt for this amount of time, and that gives you a BTU rating. The trickiest part about BTU rating, and I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit here, is that it's an average over a certain amount of time that this test is run. Now, for anything with a regulator, it's very straightforward because like you just run at that output, right? For direct pressure systems, it becomes a little trickier because it's very sensitive to what size fuel can you have, how much fuel is in the canister, what's the temperature. It's going to be very sensitive to all these things. So if anything is done a little bit different, you'll get a very different result. And even changing fuel cans will give you a different result where, again, if you're a regulator, that stuff doesn't matter so much. Direct pressure, it will matter. So where it becomes really weird is when you compare BTU output on a regulated stove to BTU output on a direct pressure stove. It's not apples to apples, really ever. Okay. Because on a direct pressure, it starts at one level, it changes over time, depending on all these variables, and then they take an average for that. So you don't have I guess in the end, you don't have a constant output with direct pressure. So like you can compare Flash to Zip to some other stove that is direct pressure, but then if you're comparing to a regulated stove, it becomes really weird. And that's when you get into things like, well, this says higher output, but the boil time's different than this. And like these numbers start to not make any sense. So like that's a complicating factor there.
It's cool. Now when people ask, we can go, we'll just have a shortcut to this part of the video. And we go, Mike from JetBoil explains it really well.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, don't get so caught up on it.
I've got two other questions now, sorry, that I've thrown up from that. In terms of your time to boil or your boil time for your 500 mil or whatever, and your gas consumption rates, what are the testing standards for those?
Yeah, so the boil time, there's no standardized test for that really, which is a little tricky because, we're never quite sure, like, how is the competition doing this exactly? We know exactly how we do it.
Yep.
And we're measuring, 500 milliliters to bring it from 20 degrees to 100 degrees. And it's basically that, that's simple. And it's pretty straightforward.
You say 20 to 100. I'm assuming that's Fahrenheit, or is that Celsius?
Celsius.
Ooh,
Celsius, yeah.
What a pleasant surprise.
Fahrenheit.
Being accommodating here.
And is that in lab or is that out in the field? Like, I'm assuming dead still, ambient temperature. Like, what are we going on
it's
here?
a standardized lab test, so we can be very consistent with it, and kind of take out some of those natural things that might change it. So you should always expect that the elements will affect things for sure. Whether it's kind of warm out, I mean, you might go faster if it's warm out and your fuel's a little warm. If you have a low can and it's cold out, you might go a little slower. Things like the wind and whatnot will definitely affect your efficiency. So,
and in terms of your gas consumption, like you've got, I don't know, I'm not even going to pretend to pull something out, but you've got particular amount of grams per hour. What settings is that on? Is that on like full blast?
Yeah, so that's always full blast, and that's the same exact conversation as the BTU rating. So all you do is you end up taking your rate of how many grams are coming out in a set amount of time, and then you figure out how much energy is in that number of grams, and that's your BTU rating. It's basically like a energy rate versus a mass rate. It's the same test for both of those.
Cool.
With the same weird factors that go into it. Yep.
Mike, that's been great. I've learned a lot.
Yeah, me too.
Today, and probably answered a lot of questions that I've given fuzzy answers to customers for many years now. I've now got some clarity around it. Quite often people seem to make things up, but what you've said makes sense, and that's been really good. But really appreciate your time today. Did you have anything else you wanted to add about JetBoil? You're not going to give us any teasers on future products? So.
He's not allowed to, Ben.
No,
Stop bullying him.
Not allowed to. No. I wish I could, but I'm excited, and stay tuned. Yeah. And I hope everybody enjoys the new product. I'm really glad that you guys have it there in your hands.
My takeaway might be that I just probably have to get a zip as well.
Because you need another stove.
Well, yeah, it's no frills, baby. Everyone needs a bit of no frills in their life.
Thanks for your time today, Mike. We really appreciate it. We'll let you. It's probably after knockoff time there now.
Oh yeah, yep.
Can you go and have a
I appreciate you guys coming in early and making that effort to have me. It was great to be on and great to meet you.
Yeah, we're glad we could line the times up.
Thanks so much, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
All right.
That's it. Another episode of Snowy's Camping Show. That was fun. I enjoyed that.
Yeah,
and
I'm sure
our listeners are going to enjoy it.
I think it's our first official international guest.
It is.
Oh, it's Empire, New Zealand, technically international. Yeah, not the same.
This is proper international.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. All right.
Thanks for joining us, folks. We'll see you next week.
See you next time. Bye.